Hi, I'm Amanda Borup. I'm a policy analyst with the Recreational Marijuana Program here at the OLCC, and I just want to give you an overview today of the current rules that are in place that were effective the beginning of January of this year, and then the rules that are going to be coming into play this summer through our rulemaking process due to 2018 legislation. So I want to start with the micro-tier processing. So the rules that went into place allow for a micro-tier producer to do limited concentrate production. And so that means they can use water or they can use a mechanical mechanism for the concentrate production. To be able to do this, you would just apply on our website. We have a form for the micro-tier processing, and you would go ahead and fill that out, send it into the address that the form specifies, and then wait until you hear back from our agency to be able to actually go ahead and start doing that limited processing. So this has been available since January. At this point in time, we don't have any micro-tier producers that have taken advantage of it, but it is something that's available, so everybody should know that that form's up if it's something that you're interested in as a micro-tier. Immature canopy. So for new applications that are being licensed after April 1st, or for people that are coming up for their renewal after April 1st, you'll have to designate an immature canopy area. So prior to this, you were able to have unlimited immature canopy. Now you'll have to have an actual area specified with your mature canopy. One thing to keep in mind is when you, let's use the example of 10,000 square feet of mature canopy. If you wanted to have 2 stacks of that, you could have 5,000 square feet of mature flowering plants, and on top of it, you could have another 5,000 square feet of mature flowering plants, and that would equal your 10,000. For the immature canopy, it's going to be different than that. If you had 5,000 square feet of mature, immature plants, and then you wanted another stack on top of that of immature plants, it would still be only that 5,000. So it's the footprint for the immature plants. So you're still able to have quite a few immature plants and stay within those limits. And if by chance that you need more than is allowable, you can apply for the propagation endorsement. Those forms are also available on the website, and that would allow you to be more of like a nursery type setup where you would be able to sell immature plants to other producers, wholesalers, and retailers. One of the things that did change finally got put into rule about every legislative session. There's been something on the law that said that a OLCC licensed producer can produce for medical patients. And it keeps changing, so every time we get the rule into place, it's basically not effective anymore. Well, finally, we have a rule in place that is effective. I heard last week we had 1 inspection, so somebody is actually taking advantage of this rule at this point. What this allows you to do is grow an additional 10% on top of your canopy for medically designated canopy. You have to give 75% of the annual yield to patients, and 25% of the annual yield can be transferred into a processor, a wholesaler, or a retailer. And so really the point of this is to be producing marijuana for patients. There are some limits to the amount that can be given at one point in time. So at one point in time, you could give a patient 24 ounces of usable marijuana, and then you could give them that same patient 3 pounds over a year. And Metric will talk later about the external transfers and how this is tracked in Metric, but it is all tracked in Metric, and when it goes out to a patient, it would be transferred out to a patient and associated with a patient number. And so this will allow you, if you were a medical grower, transferred to recreational, and you still want to provide for patients maybe that you used to grow for, they don't designate you as a grower, you're just able to do that for them. Oh, and the one more thing I would like to say about that is that a lot of people ask, like, how do we know what our annual yield's going to be? And so I'd just like to say, if you're planning on doing this, to really err on the side of safety, keep in mind your additional canopy is for patients. And so you'd want to be giving a majority of each of your harvests to the patients to make sure that actually 75% of the annual yield is going to them. Startup inventory. So we're going to be doing rulemaking this summer, talking about the startup inventory. currently when you're licensed, you have 90 days as a producer to be able to receive your startup inventory from anywhere within the state. So that would be, your clones, your seeds, your immature plants, things like that. That rule is set to expire. The commission realizes that genetics is a concern within the industry, and being able to get new genetics in and be able to actually make sure that you'll be able to grow the kind of plants you want. And so we'll be holding a rules advisory committee this summer to address this issue and to see if it is something that the industry believes needs to be extended, how it needs to be extended, and then in what areas. If it's something, maybe possibly just seeds should be allowed to be let in after the 90 days or something like that. And so while I'm talking, a lot of my slides are going to be about rulemaking and the process. And so right here, I'll just go ahead and say, since this one will come up first, what we do is we have a rules advisory committee, and they'll go over rule language and be able to discuss changes to the rules and what will work and what won't work. Then we have a public comment period. And so we have it where you can come and comment in person at the OLCC, or you can write in with your public comment. And so when these rules come out, it's really important that you take a chance to read them, because they're going to affect your businesses. And if you see something that you don't agree with, rather than just writing in and saying, I don't like that, or that doesn't work for me, it's very, very helpful if when you write in, you say, this wouldn't work for my business because of this, and I think a better option would be this, or this may work better for the industry, to actually give some sort of idea on how the problem can be fixed, rather than just saying that it's something you don't agree with, is much more helpful to us as an agency and staff. Because if we get one in that says we don't like it, we're like, okay, next, unless a lot of people say they don't like it. But it's really helpful to know what people believe actually would be a good answer. All right, so another big change is processing for patients. So 2017 legislation, and then our rules that went in effect in January, allows an OLCC processor to take in product from patients, process it, and then give it back to the patients. So that would come in, obviously from the patient, as an external transfer through Metric. So it'd be in Metric while it's in your processing facility. You'd be able to process it, have it tested, and then you could actually give that back to the patient, and it would be an external transfer again when it goes back to the patient. So it's still tracked while it's inside the licensed system. There are limits to this, however. And so, for example, an extract, you could only take in 24 ounces of usable at one time from a patient, and you could only give them back 1 ounce of extract at a time. And then there's also annual limits. They're all spelled out in the rules what those limits are exactly. And the thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about doing this is the rule allows you to take in product from multiple patients at once, possibly do a run, and then be able to give that, let's say extract back to the patients based on the amount that they had given you. So you don't have to do really small runs for one patient at a time. You could, but it allows for a larger run if that's something you're interested in. And like the micro tier and the other forms, you'll be able to apply for this online. It's just an additional endorsement for your processor license. So it's nothing that would take a brand new application. Processing industrial hemp. So this is kind of a big change. There have been some people that have applied for this endorsement. What this allows is an OLCC processor to take in hemp flower, hemp concentrate, or hemp extract from an ODA hemp grower or handler that has an OLCC hemp certificate, and be able to process that product. So it only comes in at the processor level, and then the processor actually has to process it before moving it forward into the supply chain. And then the next slide is going to talk a little bit more about the rules. The one thing to really keep in mind with the hemp, though, is once it comes in, it doesn't go back out again. So it's not like processing for a patient when you can give it back to the patient. When the hemp grower or handler decides that they want a product to go in the OLCC market, once it comes in, it stays in until it goes to the retail and is sold to a consumer. So hemp that's being processed at the processor level it needs to be tested to verify that it has no more than 5% THC. So if you're receiving flower material in and you're processing it into an extract or concentrate, that extract or concentrate has to be tested for potency before it's transferred again. If you're a processor and you're receiving concentrate or extract from an ODA handler, and that comes into your facility, you need to have the potency testing done before anything else is done to it, just to verify that it actually is industrial hemp and it's not marijuana. And so some people do think that the testing may be a little bit redundant, but reasonably speaking, when the law changed to allow this to happen, we wanted to make sure that there was extra potency testing done at this level just to make sure that we weren't having unlicensed growers transfer marijuana in as hemp. And so this shows that at least at the concentrate extract level that it's below 0.5% THC. So also with this, after you have the potency testing done, you can then, if you would like, let's say for example you have a hemp extract and a marijuana extract. The processor then could mix the two together. Once they're mixed, it's considered marijuana. So if by chance you were to add any marijuana to the hemp after the hemp's been tested, it automatically turns it into a marijuana item. It's entered as a marijuana item in metric. When it makes it to retail, it's taxed and it's listed as a marijuana item. If you keep it solely industrial hemp derived and you don't add any marijuana to it, its item type in metric is hemp. It's transferred to, let's say, a retail store, and its items type is still hemp and it's not taxed as marijuana would be. So that's something you want to keep in mind, and if there's questions at the end, I can definitely take those. So a little bit more about the hemp. It's probably more of the changes that have happened this year. At an OLCC retail store, they were allowed, in the past, last year, they were allowed to take in hemp items, directly from basically anybody who was making them in Oregon. They didn't need to come through the supply chain. They just had to be packaged and tested and labeled accordingly. And so now that the hemp has a way in to the license system, it can't come from just out from anybody anymore. It has to come from an OLCC processor to a wholesaler or processor to a retailer. The stores that had those products had until April 1st to sell them down. So this is just kind of like a reminder, it's past April 1st, so those products should no longer be in the retail stores. Any hemp item that's in an OLCC retail store should be in metric, should be listed as a hemp item, and it should have been received from within the license system. Also, another one of the big retail changes was retail to retail transfer of product. This only applies to businesses that have 100% the same financial interest and same ownership. So if you have two retail stores that have identical ownership, including people with financial interest, then you would be able to transfer from one retail store to another retail store. Otherwise, this would not apply. And then if you have questions about, if you're really close and you have a question about how much is identical, then you would want to send those into licensing, and we can look at your specific example to see if you fit in or not. So this is probably going to be one of the biggest changes that we see this year with the marijuana system is medical growers, for the most part, a certain subset of them are going to be tracking in the cannabis tracking system. One of the allowances given by law is that they're able to transfer 20 pounds of usable marijuana into an OLCC processor or a wholesaler if they're in the metric system. So before they're going to be allowed to do that, though, they're going to have to verify to the OLCC that they have legal access to water. When somebody's just growing strictly medical marijuana, they're not receiving any money for doing that, it's not a commercial purpose, those rules may not have applied to them. But once they decide that they're transferring 20 pounds into a commercial market, then they have to be treated as all other commercial agriculture would be, and that would require them to provide legal access to water. So I really like to point this out, even though this isn't the medical group, just because I have a feeling as soon as people get into metric, they're going to say, hey, I have 20 pounds I want to transfer to you. and it's not going to really work like that. They won't be able to transfer to retail, first of all, so no retailer should be receiving any product from medical growers. Retailers are still receiving product through the OLCC license chain. Processors and wholesalers, however, would be able to receive that product once the growers are approved. And so the way you're going to know, basically, is that they'll be able to transfer that to you through Metric. It'll come through Metric with a transport manifest. It'll show up in your inventory in Metric, and it'll be like any other transfer that you receive from within the license system. So if somebody tells you, I just can't do it in Metric, it's not working for me, or something like that, it's going to be very questionable as to whether they're actually allowed to do that 20-pound transfer. So I just want everybody to know that it's going to look like any other transfer you get, and just kind of be ready for that coming on after July 1st. So these are some changes that are going to be happening upcoming this summer as well, based on 2018 legislation. So what was happening is ODA handlers and growers could apply for an OLCC hemp certificate. And this would allow the hemp handler or grower to transfer product into the processor that I talked about earlier. 2018 legislation kind of changed the way that looks. So basically what the agency did was we stopped issuing the hemp certificates to the handlers and growers as soon as the bill took effect. So everybody that currently has a certificate can still transfer into an OLCC processor that has a hemp endorsement. So that process can still take place during rulemaking. We're just not giving any new certificates right now. However, if a processor wants to apply for the hemp endorsement and they haven't had a chance to do so yet, you're free to do that at any time. So what's going to be changing is the way that the hemp is going to enter into the OLCC system. So the ODA handlers and growers will still need to apply for a certificate with OLCC. The difference is going to be once they get that certificate, they're actually going to be entered into the metric system. And so they'll have all the testing conducted prior to that transfer to an OLCC licensee. And then that transfer will also come through the metric system. So it'll streamline more with the other, with the actual way you receive marijuana products in the system. And so right now what we can talk about is kind of just the broad way it's going to look, because what we have right now is the actual law that tells us the broad categories that we're going to make happen. The rulemaking for it is actually going to be what gets into the details. So for right now, we just kind of wanted to highlight what's going to be happening. And then as the summer progresses, I encourage you guys to sign up for our listservs and come to our meetings if it's something that's of interest to you, to be able to stay up to date on the changes. And the big change is going to be that ODA registered hemp growers and handlers with the certificate will not only be able to transfer in hemp and hemp extracts and concentrates, they'll be able to transfer in hemp products as well. And they'll be able to transfer those to processors, wholesalers, or retailers. So you'll be able to see in the future an ODA handler would be able to make a hemp product, let's say a hemp soda, and it could go directly to retail without going through the other OLCC license types. So those are the type of changes that we will be discussing to see how that'll look in the future. So I wanted to touch on our current compliance. So I'm sure most of you read about the minor decoy operations. So at first they were really bad. We put out some notices, changed the way that we were treating those operations a little bit, and then last time we ran them it was 100% and nobody was selling to minors. So I certainly hope that you guys keep up the good work on that. So does the agency. It makes Oregon look really, really good not to be selling to people under the age of 21. So what we're doing right now with retailers is on-site compliance inspections. So we're going in, we're going to be looking at your metric inventory, looking at your real inventory, seeing if those match up, seeing if you've made any unapproved alterations to the premise. You know, this is really important for all license types. You can't just build out just because you decided to. You basically have to send those plans in, have them approved, and then you could do the build out and you'll get an inspection. And basically the reason for that is we do an on-site inspection of every premise prior to licensure. And so we want to make sure that when you do make changes, that they're also still in line with your rules and your security that you're originally licensed under. We'll also look for unapproved business structure changes. It's also a big one. You can't just sell off half of your company and never let us know. It's really important that those changes are ran through the OLCC and the appropriate backgrounds and fingerprints happen when they need to. And then also, probably one of the big, well, two other big ones, the security cameras I'll mention, just because it's really important, not just to have them, but to actually make sure that they're in working order. Make sure they are working, make sure you have your backup, make sure your offsite backup's working. Make sure your cameras are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. It doesn't hurt to check in every once in a while just to make sure that you're actually in compliance. Something could happen, maybe it went offline, you were unaware of it, and that's really gonna be bad for a compliance action if we can't see anything you've done for, a week or something like that. And then the auditing of the tracking system data. So the nice thing about having the tracking system is that we're able to see the industry as a whole at one time. So if we want to look at something to see, for example, if there were any retailers that sold over the daily sales limits in a day, we could look at those numbers on a statewide to see who was doing it. So what we're doing and what we have been doing is using that data to actually audit licensees. So if we notice, for example, this is going to be probably a better example, we notice that everybody's doing something wrong and it's not that big of a deal. What we're going to do is we're going to send out a compliance bulletin and basically say, this is what's going on, this is how you should be entering this in metric, and if you have any questions, contact us. We'll send that out and then we'll check the data again in like a week, and we'll notice 50% of the licensees that were doing it wrong are now doing it right. In another week, we get like 75% of people doing it right. So we're like, oh good, people are actually paying attention, everybody's trying to be compliant. And so those types of issues are easily fixed through those compliance bulletins. So if you don't read those, I would encourage you to, because there's very helpful information in them. The other thing is if people are just blatantly breaking the law, breaking the rules, and putting it into the tracking system, we're able to see it. We're able to see that things are way wrong in a facility or in a number of facilities, and we can take compliance action based on those audits a lot of times. So it's just a really good idea if you use a point of sale system to make sure that your information is getting over to Metric correctly and timely. And then if you're entering your information in Metric, maybe you, the licensee, aren't entering it, maybe you have an employee entering it, doing a little audit every once in a while on yourself, just to make sure that your data is what it should be and that you're compliant, because ultimately it is the licensee's responsibility. So this is always my favorite slide, even though you guys have seen it a million times. It's our website, and there is a lot of stuff on it, and I'm sure by now you guys all know, but the left-hand side is the side where you find all the tabs, which is the easiest way to get through the website. So like I was saying about the compliance bulletins, if by chance you haven't seen them or haven't had a chance to read them, you can click on the bulletins tab, and it takes you to a list of all the bulletins that we've ever put out. And we have a brand new section that's hemp-related bulletins as well, so they aren't mixed in with the regular marijuana bulletins. Also, the frequently asked questions. I continually get calls with questions, and I just copy and paste them from frequently asked questions in an email and send them out, because actually we do update those on a pretty regular basis, and we actually update them with frequently asked questions. And so it's helpful just to kind of take a quick look if you haven't, just to see if it answers your question. Hemp has its own tab now. Licensing and forms and publications is where you guys are going to find all of those forms I was talking about. So they're in two places, so you really can't miss them. And that way, if you do want to apply for any of the additional endorsements or any of the additional, medical propagation, anything like that, you'll be able to easily find those forms. And then if you can't, you can always send us an email at marijuana@oregon.gov, just like always, with a question about where to find something, or maybe you heard something was going to be changing but couldn't find it on the website. We're always happy to take those emails and take those calls. And so the one thing I would like to point out here is the Cannabis Tracking System tab, because that tab actually is going to change. When you click on it, you get to this page where you can either be an OLCC licensee, you have a different tab to click, or you can be an OMMP or registrant. And so the medical tracking, they're going to have their own section. And so we just didn't want everybody to be surprised that this looks different and you have to take an extra step. But as an OLCC licensee, you will want to make sure your documents and all of your information is separate from the medical, so we can keep them, try to make it as less confusing as possible. All right, and then the last slide is our mission statement. Just like to put it up there so everybody's aware of what it is. All right, guys, thanks for coming.